Hello, my name is Thomas Alfaya, and I will be presenting on 3 different ecosystems from Florida Ecology Lab: pine flatwoods, scrub, and hardwood hammock. So starting off, we have pine flatwoods. This ecosystem is defined by a pine overstory and a thick shrub layer with scattered herbaceous and ground-covered plants. Many of the species that I have observed are wildflowers as opposed to large trees, as the main tree in this ecosystem is just a longleaf pine, at least at the Hall-Scott Preserve, which we took our field trip to. So the main species that I observed at the Hall-Scott Regional Preserve were definitely saw palmetto, or Serenoa repens. They are perennial evergreen and flowering shrubs, although their flowers are quite small. They are quite adaptable to many Florida environments, including pine flatwoods, scrub, and coastal hammock. They get their saw name from the saw-like appearance on their stems. So another common species I found in the Mesic flatwoods was galberry, or Ilex glabra. These are perennial evergreen shrubs that can grow up to 6 feet tall. Their height was one of the identifying factors for me, as they were one of the taller shrubs in the ecosystem. Another identifying factor was their oval-like leaves and also their seed shape. These are pretty adaptable to many Florida ecosystems, including pine flatwoods, as well as swamps and wetlands. I was able to find tons of longleaf pine at the Hall-Scott Preserve, also known as Pinus palustris. They are a symbol of fire dependence, as they are very survivable in fire-dominated ecosystems. I was able to identify the species mainly through the fact that I was able to find a few grass stages, which wouldn't be found in many other species, at least, of pine. Also, the red-cockaded woodpeckers prefer to nest in longleaf pine, and because of the work that Hall-Scott does with the woodpecker, it makes sense that this would be a longleaf pine. So vanilla leaf, or Cryptophrys odoratissimus. I wasn't sure on the specific variety of the species, but I do lean more towards the variety of Subtropicanus, just because I did not smell a vanilla smell, which is particular to the variety of odoratissimus. False vanilla leaf is endemic to the state of Florida and is a perennial wildflower that can grow up to 4 feet tall. They are pretty identifiable and stand out in the shrub layer due to their height and color. So here we have a herbaceous ground-covered plant, Carolina yellow-eyed grass, also known as Xyris caroliniana. The flowers are pretty distinct with 3 petals and a cone-like head underneath them. They are pretty hardy and can live in multiple ecosystems such as pine flatwoods, sandhills, and scrub. According to Florida Wildflowers by Taylor, traditionally, indigenous Americans brewed a tea from the roots that could help with digestive issues. So the next herbaceous species that I have found was the St. Peter's wort, or Hypericum tetrapetalum. These were pretty difficult to identify, but I mainly did it through their habitat range. These are pretty exclusive to pine flatwoods as opposed to other species such as the St. Andrew's cross. Their leaves are also slightly bigger and heart-shaped. So the next species was also pretty hard to identify. This is the Florida fall sunflower, or Phrobanthus grandiflorus. These are a Florida endemic species, but they are pretty similar to the pineland fall sunflower. I was mainly able to identify it through the pineland fall sunflower's limited range. They are not found in Orlando. The Florida fall sunflower is pretty often found in pine flatwoods. They have pretty distinctive oval-like yellow leaves, which are a little bit more fuller in the Florida fall sunflower as seen in the picture. So the next species I found is another perennial wildflower, the rose rush, or the Lygodesmia aphylla. These are pretty close to being a Florida endemic species, but there are a few territories in southern Georgia that have them. These are pretty solitary flowers, usually just the one by itself, with other flowers being pretty distant from it. So now we can move on to the vertebrate species. First we have the ornate pennant, or the Celithymus ornata. This species is found in Florida, but it can also be found in other southern US states. I was mainly able to identify the species through the brown sort of blob on its center lower wing, and also the stripes on its tail, and its blue color. So the next species was one of the most common butterflies I saw at the preserve. It was the little metalmark, or the Calophyllus virginiensis. It is the only metalwork species in the southeast United States, which is why it was sort of easy to identify. Its rusty color and a lighter band on the outside of its wings was another factor in its easy identification. So the last species I'm talking about today for the pine flatwoods is the pinewoods tree frog, or the Hyla femoralis. Its call is described as a sort of Morse code with rapid tap-in sounds. Its habitat range is actually throughout most of Florida despite its name, with a few exceptions in South Florida near the Everglades. So the second ecosystem we went to was scrub, specifically at the Lyonia Preserve in Deltona. Scrubs are defined by an evergreen shrub layer dominated by saw palmettos, shrubby oaks, and Florida rosemary. Sometimes there could be a pine overstory, but that's not always the case. Scrubs have a potential for overgrowing if prescribed fires aren't ample enough. So now we have the namesake of the Lyonia Preserve, the rusty sagarbush or the rusty Lyonia, also known as the Lyonia ferruginea. They are an evergreen shrub or tree that reaches up to 15 feet tall. They have a distinct rusty appearance, especially in juvenile and young leaves. So now we're on to Florida prickly pear, also known as devil's tongue, Opuntia austrina. These are a Florida endemic species that produce yellow flowers. In terms of actual species identification, I did have trouble deciding on whether it was a Florida prickly pear or a regular prickly pear that are much more common generally in the US. I landed on Florida prickly pear mainly due to the scrub habitat we were in, and most of the prickly pear that I was seeing were more tall compared to low growing, and I think standard prickly pear tends to be more low growing. So now we have Florida rosemary, also known as Ceratiola ericoides. They are an allelopathic evergreen shrub that are pretty common in scrub territories. Because of their allelopathic nature, they can become pretty dominant in certain scrub habitats, preventing different organisms from growing around them. Because of their spiky and narrow leaf structure, identification was pretty easy. So Faye's prairie clover, also known as Dahlia fayi, are herbaceous wildflowers that end up growing around 2 feet tall. They have globular terminal spikes that are a pinkish purple color. They are native to coastal and inland scrubs, and also sandhills. Here we have shortleaf gayfeather or shortleaf blazing star, also known as Liatris tenuifolia. They are a perennial wildflower that are endemic to coastal plains in southern USA, but thrive in general scrub territory. At first, when I encountered these in the scrub, I thought they were vanilla leaf, but vanilla leaf is a little bit different. Vanilla leaf has a more narrow stem, and then it shoots out at the top with the purple flowers. The blazing star is more compact with the flowers, and the flowers kind of go down with the stem more so. Chapman's goldenrod, also known as Solidago odora variety Chapmani. They are again a perennial wildflower that adapts well to dry, xeric, sandy soils. There are another species that are almost endemic to Florida. There's just a few territories in Georgia that also have this species. Myrtle oak, also known as Quercus myrtifolia, is an evergreen shrub or tree that thrives in sandy scrub environments. Specifically at the Lyonia Preserve, they were a common shrub found. I was able to identify them mainly through the roundish oval leaves and the fact that they were shiny on both sides. This is a Garbaria or Garbaria heterophylla. They are a woody shrub that produces pink and purple flowers. They are also endemic to Florida's scrub and xeric hammocks. At first in the field, I thought this was an oak species, mainly due to the really interesting leaf patterns. I thought it kind of resembled some of the oaks that we learned about in class, but no, they are actually just a really cool flower and shrub species. So the main identifying species, to me at least, of the Florida scrub is the Florida scrub jay, also known as the Aphyllocoma cerulescens. They are a threatened species federally, and their main threats are habitat degradation and fragmentation. A big problem is just not having enough suitable habitat for them, especially considering they are so territorial. They need lots and lots of acres of scrub, but that's just not available to them. They are a very social species. They got super close to me They seemed very curious. Here we have a 6-line race runner, also known as a Nematophorus sexlinatus. They have yellow stripes down their sides, and juveniles have blue tails. I am pretty sure this specific race runner in the photo had a blue tail. I think the lighting is just a little bit off, but that is part of why I was able to identify the species. They are pretty common throughout Florida, specifically in dry habitat like scrubland. Here we have a longhorn bandwing grasshopper, also known as Cnidaria fenestralis. They can be found in general eastern United States in both sandy scrub habitat and forest territories. Their wings will often have a bright orange band closer to the center near the body. They can also be identified through their banded legs right here. As you can see in the photo, this one has dark and almost near white coloration on its legs. Here we have a sandhill carpenter ant, also known as Camponotus socius. Their general U.S. range is in southern states, but there seems to be more species abundance in Florida specifically. They prefer xeric and dry habitats, so scrubland is perfect for them. Identification wasn't too bad considering they have pretty distinctive bands on their abdomen. As you can see in the photo, there are 2 light colored bands on there. Okay, last but not least, we have hardwood hammock. These ecosystems are generally defined by a close canopy of evergreen trees, including cabbage palm and live oak, as you can see in the photo. We specifically went to the Little Big Econ, where there was both a mesic and hydric hammock, although most of the species I will be talking about were in the mesic hammock portion. So firstly, I found the American beautyberry, also known as the Calocarpa americana. These are woody shrubs that grow up to be around 6 feet tall. Their berries are edible. They sort of taste like pop and boba to me. They don't really have much taste, but the texture is interesting. A lot of people do make jams out of them and other crafts and whatnot. Here we have white beggar ticks, or Bidens alba. They are a very common Florida weed. Their native status is actually pretty questioned. Technically, they are considered a native wildflower in Florida, but it is disputed. There isn't really records of them going past the 19th century, and genetically they are more similar to closely related species in Mexico. But nonetheless, they are very popular with pollinators. Virginia creeper, or Parthenocissus quinquefolia, is a flowering vine that ends up producing green flowers. You can often find them growing around different tree species in the mesic hammock. The main way I identified these was through the semi-jagged leaves of the vine. Here we have a partridge pea, or Chamaecrista fasciculata. They are a perennial herbaceous wildflower, and they are a host to the gray hairstreak and cloudless sulfur butterflies. But they are only actually pollinated by the long-tongued beetle. I was able to identify these not only by the yellow flowers and interesting leaf shapes, but there is also a seed pod, I believe, to the center left of the photo. It could be grass, but I'm pretty sure it is a seed pod. Here we have muscadine, or Vitis rotundifolia. It's another climate woody vine similar to that of the Virginia creeper, and they flower in the spring, producing grapes. Those grapes could of course be used for jam, jellies, wine, or even clothing dye if you really wanted to. Here we have Baldwin's flatsedge, or Cyperus croceus. They're another common Florida weed. They're generally found in southeast United States, and they prefer more hydric and mesic systems, so you won't find them as much in scrub habitat, for example. Here we have scratchthroat coralberry, also known as Christmasberry, Ardisia crenata. These are an invasive species that are often found in hardwood hammocks in Florida. They are native to Asia and are pretty dangerous because they can potentially outcompete native species for resources, including light, which is pretty important in a hardwood ecosystem. Lastly, for hardwood hammock flora, we have resurrection fern, also known as Pleopeltis michosiana. They're able to dehydrate for extended periods of time and eventually revive after they receive water. In terms of identification, they were pretty easy to identify considering there are not many ferns that look like this species. So pretty much in the field I was able to be like, that is a resurrection fern for sure. We have the eastern gray squirrel, or Sciurus carolinensis. They are common in woodland ecosystems and urban areas, which made identification so much easier because I already knew what I was looking for. And they consume and forage for different acorns, berries, seeds, and bark. I also was able to find a pileated woodpecker, also known as Dryocopus pileatus. Their main food is carpenter ants. They like to nest in dead trees, which then could be used for other animals. And I was able to identify them through their longer striped neck and the signature red mohawk, and the fact that it was slightly bigger than other woodpeckers in general. Another woodpecker I saw was the red-bellied woodpecker, also known as the Melanopes carolinus. They nest in dead trees, and their diet consists of invertebrates and seeds, nuts, etc. I was able to identify it through their black speckled back, clear white face, and their red hair. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. See ya.